She stood frozen in the doorway, her blonde hair glistening in the sunlight, her designer suit failing to hide her shaking hands. 200 tattooed men, former gang members turned military veterans, filled her immaculate suburban lawn, standing in military formation, silent, watching, waiting. All because Karen Wilcox, 40, president of the Maple Creek Homeowners Association, had called Elena Rodriguez neighborhood trash and destroyed a memorial to her fallen daughter. Now Karen faced consequences that no HOA handbook had prepared her for when her suburban power trip collided with street justice wrapped in legalese. What happens when an HOA president discovers that the immigrant family she's been terrorizing has a son who leads 200 former reformed gang members with government insignia? Maple Creek Estates is more than just another suburb. It represents the pinnacle of American retirement success, with median home values of $800,000 and immaculate streets lined with matching mailboxes. It represents what decades of hard work can achieve: security, uniformity, and exclusivity. For nearly a decade, Karen Wilcox has turned her volunteer position as HOA president into a personal kingdom. The 40-year-old former corporate compliance director runs the association with ruthless efficiency, wielding the covenant rulebook like a weapon. Despite her youth, her platinum hair and designer suits project an authority that compels even retirees twice her age to do her bidding. "I have devoted my career to upholding standards," Karen reminded everyone at monthly meetings, her manicured fingers tapping her gold-embossed property ledger. "This community represents our shared values and standards of living, and I will not allow anyone to challenge the orderly system we have all pledged to uphold." Her system worked perfectly until the Rodriguez family bought the smallest house in the community, using their entire life savings plus a loan from their son, Manuel, a decorated Vietnam veteran and retired postal worker, and his wife, Elena, who had fled political persecution in her home country. They represented something Karen had not anticipated: the diversity of her carefully tended community. The house is being foreclosed on, Karen complained to her inner circle over wine. The bank should have done more due diligence on the buyer. The neighborhood would have been ruined. What no one in Maple Creek realized, what was about to upend their comfortable existence, was that the Rodriguez family had connections that extended far beyond their quiet suburban street. Connections that would transform their community in ways no one could have imagined. The conflict began with something that should have been inoffensive: a small memorial garden Elena had created in the corner of their backyard, part of which was visible from the street. The garden honored their daughter, Maria, who had died of leukemia while serving in the Army Special Forces. The colorful ceramic statues, candles, and marigolds surrounding Maria's military portrait were part of their cultural tradition of honoring fallen heroes. The first violation notice came within 48 hours of the garden's completion. Section 8, Paragraph C expressly prohibits unauthorized structures and unapproved landscaping elements, Karen had written in bold red marker across the top of the page. Remove immediately or face escalating penalties starting at $100 per day. Manuel, still wearing his postal service uniform after his shift, walked the 3 blocks to Karen's house, Maria's military photo and Purple Heart in hand. "Miss Wilcox," he began respectfully on her porch, "I'd like to explain about the garden. It honors our daughter who died serving her country. Perhaps there's a provision for a memorial." Karen examined her manicured nails without inviting him in. "I don't care if she's the president's daughter," she replied, handing the photo back without looking. "Rules are rules. Take it down by Friday or face a fine." While the shrine remained, Karen escalated her campaign with military precision. First came daily photos documenting the violation from various angles. Then came the public humiliation at the HOA meeting. Finally, as the couple attended Sunday church, maintenance workers entered their property to remove a rose bush that Elena had planted using clippings from Maria's funeral arrangements. The ensuing confrontation was captured on 3 different neighbor security cameras. Elena, still dressed in church clothes, approached Karen at the community mailboxes. "You destroyed my daughter's favorite flowers," Elena sobbed, clutching the wilted rose stems. "How could you do this to a memorial to our daughter?" Karen's response, delivered loud enough for everyone at the mailbox to hear, was later described as the trigger that lit the fuse. "Maybe in your country, people ignore the law when it's convenient," Karen replied, looking down over her designer reading glasses. "But this is America. If you can't respect our rules, you should go back to where you came from." What Karen doesn't realize is that Frank Willis, a retired federal judge who lives next door to Rodriguez, is recording every word on his phone, or his daughter, who works for the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Housing and Urban Development. "The violation notices will continue until you comply," Karen added, turning away. "This neighborhood has standards that were established long before you arrived." The situation came to a head at the July HOA meeting. Elena stood nervously before the board and 24 residents, holding her daughter's portrait and military medals. "Please, I just need 3 minutes to explain why this memorial is protected under both federal housing regulations and the Service Members Civil Relief Act." Karen cut her off mid-sentence, tapping her gavel. "Your inability to follow simple rules isn't a matter of culture, Mrs. Rodriguez. It's a matter of respect. If you can't read the contract in English, you probably shouldn't be buying in an English-speaking community." A gasp echoed through the community center as Karen continued. "People like you don't understand what this community stands for," she said, her voice dripping with contempt. "We work our whole lives to create order and dignity, and then people like you try to bring your chaotic customs into our carefully structured world." Elena clutched her daughter's military photo to her chest and stormed out, tears streaming down her face. Manuel followed, his posture rigid with the dignity of a man who had endured worse, but never expected it in his own community. At the door, he turned to the silent room. "My daughter died serving this country," he said, his voice breaking. "It believes in an America that respects all of its citizens. I wonder what it would think of the way you honor its sacrifice." As the door closed behind them, the temperature in the room seemed to drop. For the first time, several board members exchanged worried glances. Thomas Sullivan, a retired cardiologist who rarely challenged Karen, cleared his throat. "Karen," he began cautiously. "That comment about trash was completely inappropriate and likely." "Next agenda item," Karen interrupted, banging her gavel. "Rodriguez's violation will be handled through legal channels, including potential lien proceedings." What no one noticed was that Frank Willis had quietly sent the video recording to both his daughter at HUD and an email address that neither of them would recognize until it was too late. That night, Elena's hands were shaking so much she could barely dial the number she'd promised herself she'd never bother her son with. He had his own life to worry about, his own battles to fight, but this was too much to bear alone. "Miguel," she said between sobs. "I'm sorry to bother you with our problems, but something happened." On the other end of the line was her son, Miguel Rodriguez, sitting in his corner office with a view of the Boston skyline. Once a troubled teenager who had joined the army with his sister, Maria, Miguel had turned his life around through education and determination. The GI Bill had sent him first to college, then to Harvard Law School. Few in Maple Creek remembered the scrawny boy who had delivered their papers. No one knew what he had become. "Mom, slow down," he said, signaling his paralegal to cancel his afternoon schedule. "Tell me exactly what happened." Miguel listened intently as Elena described the destruction of the shrine and the public humiliation. His office was silent, except for the sound of his Mont Blanc pen scribbling detailed notes. His face, usually kept carefully composed for courtroom battles, darkened at the detail. He glanced at the old tattoo on his forearm, a reminder of his past on the streets before the military gave him purpose. "Why didn't you call me sooner?" he asked softly when she finished. "We didn't want to bother you with our petty problems," Elena replied, her voice small. "And speaking of Maria, it would only remind you of losing her." Miguel's eyes slid across his office to 3 framed items hanging in perfect alignment. His own Purple Heart next to Maria's posthumous Silver Star, his Harvard Law School diploma, and a photo of his old gang brothers, the Defenders. An organization formed from his old street buddies who had followed him into the military and then into law enforcement, now united by both their troubled pasts and their commitment to protecting the vulnerable. "Send me everything," he said, his voice shifting to the commanding tone that had made him a legendary prosecutor. HOA documents, all the notices, Frank's video, everything. "Miguel, please don't cause trouble," Elena pleaded. "We just want to live in peace." "Mom," Miguel replied, his voice suddenly reminiscent of the decorated captain he had once been. "What they did dishonors Maria's memory and violates at least a dozen federal laws. This has to stop." After hanging up, Miguel made 3 calls in quick succession. The first was to Judge Sarah Whitman, a co-founder of Defender and a federal housing discrimination expert. Then to Marcus Johnson, the FBI's lead investigator on white-collar crime. Finally to Congressman David Chun, a fellow veteran who had championed legislation to protect Gold Star families from discrimination. With an encrypted message sent to the Defender's secure communications channel, he activated a protocol they had developed but never fully implemented, Operation Homecoming. On Saturday morning, subtle changes were brewing in Henderson County. The Sunrise Motel, usually half empty, hung a no-room sign. Local diners reported record breakfast sales, mostly to polite strangers with visible tattoos and gang insignia who tipped handsomely. Gas stations saw a steady stream of customized cars with Latin gang identifiers filling their tanks. At the Maple Creek Community Pool, whispers of unusual activity spread. Some residents reported seeing convoys of SUVs and lowriders at the county line. Others mentioned Latin strangers taking photos of Karen's house and the HOA office. "I hear there's some kind of Latin gang," Judith Peterson whispered to her husband as they adjusted their pool chairs. "Maybe we should call the police." "For what?" Frank Willis asked, listening as he lowered himself into the water. No laws were broken, just people passing through. As concerned residents gathered around him, Frank finally spoke his mind after 15 years of silent compliance. "I've lived here since the community was built," he said slowly, "and I've never questioned Karen's decisions. But what she said to the Rodriguez family crossed every moral line and probably a few laws." He pulled out his phone and played a video of Karen's scathing speech. Many were hearing her exact words for the first time, unfiltered by neighborhood gossip. "Did you know that Elena volunteers 20 hours a week at the local hospital where her daughter was treated?" Frank continued, "Or that Manuel delivers meals to the elderly every weekend. They live the values we only talk about." Gerald Matthews, a retired school principal, shook his head in disbelief. "I didn't know they lost a daughter in the military." Karen made it sound like they were just being hard on the rules. "That's the problem," Frank replied. "We've been confusing rules with integrity for too long." A text message alert interrupted their conversation. An emergency HOA meeting had been called for Sunday afternoon, the topic, legal action against covenant violations and community safety concerns. "Karen's going to try to force them out," Thomas Sullivan realized aloud. "She's actually going to try to evict a Gold Star family?" Karen, meanwhile, remained oblivious to the storm brewing. She spent Saturday drafting formal eviction recommendations, citing willful and continued violations of community standards. Sunday's special meeting would be her time to reassert her authority and make an example of anyone who dared challenge her vision for Maple Creek. What she didn't notice was the black SUV with government plates parked across the street, or Judge Sarah Whitman inside, systematically photographing everyone entering and leaving Karen's house, building a devastating legal case. By Saturday night, the sheriff had fielded dozens of calls from residents worried about Latino gang members in the area. His response was consistent. "No laws were broken. We're monitoring the situation." What she didn't tell the callers was that her department had received a courtesy call from Miguel, who identified himself not as a Justice Department official, but as the former leader of the notorious East Side Defenders, a group that had transformed from street fighters into veterans and advocates for justice. Whatever was going on had both street cred and top-level federal clearance. Online, community message boards exploded with speculation. Karen responded to worried board members with dismissive assurances. "These kinds of people always make noise, but rarely act. Besides, we have the law to back us up." She had no idea how disastrously wrong those words would be. Sunday morning dawned with an unnatural stillness. Karen was carefully dressed in her best navy blue slacks, the same one she'd worn to accept her HOA President of the Year award. Today would require power and presence to deal with the Rodriguez situation once and for all. At exactly 11:30 a.m., her security camera alerted her to movement at the entrance to the community. Karen checked the footage on her tablet and froze in horror. A convoy of black SUVs, custom lowriders, and sedans with tinted windows entered Maple Creek Estates. From them emerged wave after wave of Latino men with prison-style tattoos, shaved heads, and visible gang symbols on their clothing and accessories. Though they had reformed their lives as law enforcement officers and veterans, they retained the intimidating presence and solidarity of their street roots. Security footage revealed what looked like an invasion of a suburban community by an organized Latino street gang. They came in waves, spreading through the community with a disciplined precision that betrayed their street organization. First 10 men, then 50, then more than 100. By noon, more than 200 former Latino gang members, still wearing their colors and identification codes, had positioned themselves throughout Maple Creek. Their convoy of cars and SUVs were strategically parked to control all points of entry and exit. Behind curtains and shutters, residents watched in amazement and fear. Security cameras captured what many later described as the most orderly invasion in history. Men with distinctive Latino gang tattoos, teardrop signs, elaborate writing on their necks and arms, and territorial symbols created a controlled but unmistakable aura of danger. Though they were quiet and disciplined, their synchronized movements revealed both the military training and the street coordination of men who once operated within strict gang hierarchies. At the center of the formation was Miguel Rodriguez in a black Suburban with government plates. Though he maintained a professional status, his street roots were evident in the respect shown to the former gang members, many with visible MS-13, Serenos, and other Latino gang designations. Despite their suits and badges, the reformed street soldiers recognized one of their own who had risen to power. The club badge on his lapel pin, the scales of justice surrounded by barbed wire, hinted at their dual identities, former gang members who had found purpose in the military and law enforcement. Beside him was Judge Whitman, a former public defender who had represented many of these men when he was younger. The men stepped out of their cars in unison, tattooed bodies and scarred faces tell tales of hard lives. A sea of colors and gang identification codes forms an intimidating wall of masculinity that sends a chill down anyone's spine. Many have prison tattoos visible next to their military insignia, their dual pasts evident in the way they carry themselves. Some deliberately display gang symbols next to their newly earned badges, a visual reminder that these men walk in two worlds, the streets and the system. Karen's security camera records her expression shifting from annoyance to shock to sheer horror as she stands frozen in the doorway, her blonde hair glinting in the sunlight. She hugs the door frame as she watches the scene unfold before her. About 200 Latino men with gang tattoos and prison-hard expressions fill her immaculate suburban lawn in perfect formation, silent, watching, waiting. Although they now operated within the law, their appearance and demeanor were unmistakably those of the streets. Teardrop tattoos, elaborate writing on their necks and arms, and calculating stares once dominated the urban territories. Miguel stood at the front, his expensive suit a contrast to the street soldiers behind him. The only hint of his connection to them was the partially visible tattoos on his wrists and the absolute respect they showed him. It was the perfect visual representation of her worst nightmare coming true right at her doorstep. "Good morning, Ms. Wilcox," Miguel said as the door opened, presenting his business card. Miguel Rodriguez, Deputy Director of the Department of Justice's Housing Rights Division and JAG Corps Reserve Officer. "I believe we have some matters to discuss regarding your treatment of my parents and the federal laws you violated." Behind him, perfectly framed by Karen's security camera, were several men with aggressive stances and wary eyes scanning the property with the trained awareness of those who had survived on the streets. One adjusted his jacket to reveal a hint of a shoulder holster, while another's prison teardrop tattoo caught the sunlight. Their expressions carried the cold calculation of men accustomed to confrontation. "We have a meeting at noon at your community center," Miguel continued pleasantly. "I believe you called the meeting." Shall we walk together, or do you want to drive? Karen's security footage captured the exact moment her carefully constructed world began to crumble. The community center had never seen such a large attendance. Every seat was filled, with residents lining the outer walls, visible through every window. The members of the Defenders stand in line, a visual reminder of the forces currently aligned against the HOA board. "This is intimidation," Karen hissed as Miguel connected his laptop to the projector. "I will have you lose your law license for this farce." Miguel just smiled. "Everyone outside is here as a legal witness or subject matter expert. There are 14 federal judges, 26 FBI agents, 47 attorneys, and over 100 veterans who specialize in housing discrimination cases. This is not intimidation, Ms. Wilcox. This is accountability." As the residents took their seats, Miguel stepped up to the podium, his military bearing evident in his perfect posture and measured movements. "My name is Miguel Rodriguez. Many of you know me as a paperboy 20 years ago. Today, I serve as Deputy Director of Housing Rights Enforcement and hold the rank of Lieutenant Colonel in the JAG Reserve Corps." A murmur spread through the crowd as recognition flashed across the faces of longtime residents. "Some of you knew my sister, Maria, who grew up here before joining the Army Special Forces. She died of leukemia contracted while serving in areas exposed to hazardous materials. The shrine garden my mother created is a tribute to her, a protected expression under federal law." He clicked on the first slide, a photo of Elena's destroyed garden adjacent to Karen's pristine koi pond, which had violated similar covenant restrictions but had never received a violation notice. Under the Fair Housing Act, the Service Members Civil Relief Act, and the Americans with Disabilities Act, memorials to fallen service members receive special protections even within HOA jurisdiction. Selective enforcement based on national origin constitutes federal discrimination. Karen stood abruptly. "We have express covenants. Federal law supersedes HOA covenants," Judge Whitman interrupted, rising from her seat. As established in Harrington v. Westlake Community Association in 2018 and reinforced by the Gold Star Families Anti-Discrimination Act of 2023. "Who are you?" Karen asked. "Federal Judge Sarah Whitman, Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals," she replied calmly. "Currently presiding over 3 class action lawsuits challenging HOA discriminatory practices targeting protected groups." The room fell silent as the gravity of the situation became clear. Miguel clicked on the next slide. "While investigating discrimination against my parents, we discovered something disturbing that affects every homeowner in this room." The screen showed bank statements, invoices, and wire transfer records from HOA accounts for 5 years. "Ms. Wilcox has systematically embezzled funds from your association. Our forensic accountants have documented approximately $1.2 million being diverted to entities associated with her personal interests." A gasp echoed through the room as Miguel detailed the scheme. Landscaping contracts for Karen's brother-in-law at 40% above market value, security systems installed by companies in which she owned significant equity, phantom maintenance fees billed to shell companies tied to her late husband's estate. "We estimate each homeowner has been overpaid approximately $6,000 in fraudulent assessments over the past 5 years, Agent Johnson added, stepping forward to display his FBI credentials. "We've been building this case for months after the patterns emerged across multiple HOAs in the county." Karen rushed to the computer, but 2 defenders, both federal officers, gently blocked her path. "This is nonsense," she shouted. "You have no power here." "Actually," Miguel said softly, "everyone here has exactly the power you need. These men scared you. They turned their lives from the streets to service. Now they enforce the laws you broke." He gestured for a few men to open their jackets a little, revealing their badges, certificates, and military medals alongside their prison tattoos and gang markings. "The streets teach us loyalty and consequences. The system teaches us how to use those principles to pursue justice." What happened next stunned even the most skeptical residents. Thomas Sullivan, a retired physician who had served as HOA treasurer, slowly stood up. "I need to confirm something," he said, his voice shaking. "I had suspected financial irregularities for months, but was afraid to speak up." Karen threatened to reveal my daughter's past addiction struggles if I questioned the accounting discrepancies. One by one, other board members and residents rose to share similar stories. Threats, intimidation, selective enforcement based on who challenged Karen's authority or didn't fit her vision of desirable neighbors. Frank Willis played additional recordings that revealed Karen's apparent strategy for maintaining neighborhood character through targeted enforcement, a coded phrase known for discriminatory housing practices. We have documented evidence of discriminatory enforcement against every homeowner of color in this community, Judge Whitman announced. Fines were assessed at 3 times the rate. The reported violations were identical to those ignored on properties owned by white residents. The evidence was overwhelming and meticulously documented. With each revelation, Karen's supporters dwindled until she stood alone, her power dissolving before everyone's eyes. But the most devastating testimony came from an unexpected source. "I have something to add," a quiet voice said from behind. The crowd parted to reveal Judith Peterson, Karen's closest friend and staunchest supporter for nearly a decade. "Karen told me that we needed to protect our community's character and principles from these people," she said, tears streaming down her face. "She convinced me that the Rodriguez family was the first wave of something that would undermine our way of life and the rules we had all agreed to follow." Judith turned to Elena and Manuel Rodriguez, who were sitting in the front row. "I've been watching you closely, tending the garden every morning. I saw you praying there for your daughter, and I said nothing when they destroyed it because I was afraid. Not afraid of you, but afraid to stand up to Karen. I was so ashamed." She placed a small box on the table in front of Elena. "These are the ceramic angels from your memorial. I saved them when the maintenance team came. I wanted to return them, but I was too cowardly." The room fell silent as Elena opened the box, her hands shaking as she lifted the figurines, the last birthday gift her daughter had given her before leaving for duty. In that moment, something profound changed in the room. What had begun as fear of outsiders turned into recognition of a different threat, the corrosive power of unchecked power and the silence that enabled it. "I have seen enough," Judge Whitman announced. "Agent Johnson, proceed with the formal announcement." As the FBI agent read Karen her rights in connection with the financial crimes investigation, Miguel addressed the stunned community. "This was never about revenge," he said softly. "This is about justice, not just for my parents, but for every resident who has been silenced, intimidated, or made to feel unwelcome in their own home." He displayed the final slide, a blueprint for community transformation. "My organization doesn't just identify problems, we help build solutions." The question now is whether Maple Creek wants to be a model for a transparent, inclusive community. The emergency board election took less than 30 minutes. Karen was removed by unanimous vote, replaced by a diverse 5-person board that included Manuel Rodriguez and Frank Willis. As the meeting officially ended, Miguel addressed the overwhelmed residents. "The legal process against Ms. Wilcox will continue, but the more important work begins now, rebuilding trust and community. My team has prepared a transformation plan to help Maple Creek become a model for governance reform." Outside, the scene has changed dramatically. The defenders, no longer standing in menacing formation, have begun renovating the community's abandoned playground, a project that has been on the back burner for years despite funds being raised. Teams of tattooed former gang members assemble equipment, plant flowers, and repair benches. One group, led by a Marine general,